Well, it's Monday the 6th of October, so that means I get to say Happy International Geodiversity Day. I'm sat here in this glorious weather on Chesil Beach to take a minute to think about why geodiversity is worth celebrating. But what is it? Well, it's easier to think of geodiversity as all of the interconnected elements of nature that aren't alive. So that includes rocks, fossils, soils, minerals, landslides, waterfalls, rivers, and all of the processes that are ongoing in shaping those things as well. Now, the theme for this year's International Geodiversity Day is One Earth, Many Stories. And it's about all of the amazing knowledge that we gain about the history of our planet from geodiversity, and also how that knowledge is going to help us find a way into a more sustainable future. And thinking about it in terms of stories, you can zoom out to get massive grand narratives and also right down to moments in time as well. So when it comes to that idea of many stories, they are almost endless, in fact. Here in Dorset and East Devon, we have some truly enormous, epic Earth history stories to tell. Not least, of course, because we have the Jurassic Coast here, which is a World Heritage Site designated for its geodiversity. If you move from Orcombe Rocks in East Devon along 95 miles of coastline through to Studland Bay in Dorset, you can see the changes in the geology which show the changes in environments across millions of years. And trapped within those rocks are the remnants of life, fossils, which record the evolution of species across that time as well. In more modern times, recent processes in the last few million years have shaped those rocks into the landscape we see now. So this you could take as one big continuous story, starting in deserts 250 million years ago, that evolved into seas, that became coastal forests, and then swamps, and then back into the sea, laying down all kinds of different rock layers, which are then shaped through glacial processes and further erosion to create a coastline and the hills and valleys that we're familiar with now. It's a continuous story of change. Or we can divide those up and look at each rock layer as its own individual story. We could focus in on something like the Budleigh Salterton pebble beds and look at where those pebbles came from, look at the evidence they contain that show us that they actually originated in a mountain chain that was once part of Brittany in France and were brought into what is now East Devon by huge flash floods that were eroding those mountains about 250 million years ago. Or we can look at individual momentary events like the preservation of a fossil ichthyosaur, and in the ways the clues of the skeleton can tell you something about how it died, but also what state it was in when it reached the seabed to be buried, whether parts of it had been eaten, or whether it had been floating in the sea for a long time. Or perhaps even more ephemeral than that, you could visit the Spyway Dinosaur Trackway site and stand in the footprint of a sauropod dinosaur that left its mark there 145 million years ago as it was passing through, literally just passing through, walking who knows where, and it left a footprint behind. And that's just a moment in time. And we can develop that into a whole story of its own. So geodiversity is incredibly rich in that way, as we can zoom in and out of these stories, but they're not always buried in deep time either. We can look at, for example, the dry valleys in the chalk downland and think, where did these come from? Why isn't there a river in the bottom of these dry valleys? How were they eroded? Well, they were eroded in the last 2 million years, during periods of glaciation, when this whole region of England would have been more like Siberian tundra, and the freeze-thaw effects carved valleys where no rivers flow today. Or we can think about Chesil Beach itself, which is made of fragments of rock which were eroded from East Devon 100,000 years ago, and then swept eastward to form this great shingle bank in the last 6,000 years as sea levels rose. 6,000 years old, that's only how old Chesil Beach is as we know it now. That means that people who were building the Neolithic monuments that you find on the chalk downland inland, they would have seen this beach form. And now, of course, as sea levels continue to rise, and the beach continues to develop, we are seeing it slowly diminish over time. The change and the story continues. And so what? Whether the stories cover vast tracts of time or huge processes or focus in on one tiny moment, why does it matter that we know any of this stuff? I put that question once to a philosopher of paleontology, and he told me that apart from the knowledge itself being a good thing, it's also essential. The knowledge available to us from the world as we know it, as in the present ecosystems and the processes that we can study now that are active, that simply isn't enough to be able to understand the complexity of our planet and really get to grips with the way it works. So we have to look backwards in time, into millions of years of history, to get a sense of why things happen the way they do and what might happen in the future, in our own future. One really good example of that is extinction. The idea that animals could go extinct once upon a time was radical, until it was proved by geologists studying the fossil record. This transformed the way we understood nature. Now we're able to trace several mass extinction events in the fossil record. We understand what happens to the world's ecosystems when species go extinct at the kinds of rates that is happening now. That's how we know that this is a mass extinction event, and it is serious. So it's evidence from the fossil record, from geodiversity, that helps us to understand the mess we're in right now. Without that evidence, we simply would not be able to make sense of the loss of species in the way that we do. We certainly wouldn't be able to understand it as a crisis. But just like the stories of Earth's history, the stories of how we put that knowledge to use also vary in scale. So the big concept of extinction originating from our study of geodiversity, we can zoom in and look at ecosystems and habitats and species distribution. So there's a fantastic blog that's recently been written by Josh Smith, who works for Natural England, and it's called Unearthing Our Past to Restore Our Future. You can find it online, it's free to read. And in it he talks about conservation paleoecology. This uses the record of past species and their distribution to understand how climate change might affect the distribution of species today. And that's good because it will help us plan and manage conservation of our natural environment to help species thrive into the future, even as climates and environments change. Another example is how ichthyosaurs, giant marine reptiles from the Jurassic and the Cretaceous periods, are being used as a comparison for modern day cetaceans. Now, when we look at the conservation of cetaceans, we might worry about things like propeller disturbance and whether that's causing fatalities in the population. And we might record those kinds of incidents by looking at the cetaceans that wash up on the shore dead. But if we wanted to see how many of them were sinking to the seabed, we might not be able to do that because it's very expensive to get out onto the seabed. But what if you could study a seabed that was fossilised in a cliff face or in the quarry? Much, much easier to get to. And that's just what scientists have been doing, using the ichthyosaurs that are fossilised in these Jurassic and Cretaceous seabeds and looking at under what conditions they sank to the seabed. And they've realised that below a certain depth, ichthyosaurs would sink. If they died at a certain depth, they would sink, and that's where they would be fossilised. That must be happening to cetaceans as well now. And it means that there is a proportion of cetaceans that die because of human activity that are not getting washed ashore. So whatever estimates we have about cetacean deaths are probably underestimates. We're probably not counting all of them, but fossils are helping us to fix that. Our access to geodiversity depends on places like the Jurassic Coast, with its spectacular exposures of rocks and fossils and the processes that shape them, the landslides, the rockfalls, the storms. But you also find it inland, in the bedrock that is hidden beneath the soil and the grass and the trees. And in old quarries and pits, cuttings, these places too are important as an asset, as a place where we can learn about Earth's history. And they're looked after by all sorts of different people. The councils, Devon County Council and Dorset Council, work hard to maintain the World Heritage status of the coast. Inland, the national landscape teams in East Devon and Dorset are doing the same for the landscape quality. And little volunteer groups like Dorset Important Geological Sites Group volunteer to help keep rock faces clear and to help keep these sites usable for people, to inspire them and so they can visit them. So it's through these things that we can get at those many stories that are locked up in Earth's geodiversity. There's one other reason why I think those stories matter, and it's simply that they are amazing. They inspire us, they make us curious, they help us feel connected to nature. And the extra special dimension to that, I think, is that those stories are about places like the Jurassic Sea, the Triassic deserts, and animals like ammonites and dinosaurs. They don't exist anymore. And it's only human beings who are able to bring those places and those animals back to life. And we can all do that. Even if it's only in our imagination, we can all join in. We can't visit, no one can visit the deep past of our planet. But all of us can resurrect those lost worlds and those vanished lives just with a mere thought. And I think that's magic. So, happy International Geodiversity Day. I hope you will find some stories to enjoy, and thank you for taking part.